As of today, there are now 6 days left for those who wanted to enter and potentially win my PS5 console for the price of a cup of coffee, £2, plus free worldwide shipping, or, depending on the country, I may even fly to you and give you the PS5 in person because of how ridiculous shipping costs are these days. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, or if you haven't entered yet, of course just click the link in the description below and you'll be able to read all of the details. Well folks, we're finally here, talking about the car which I was really looking forward to from GT7's Christmas update. I was looking forward to seeing this car in the game since we first saw it on the data mined list of vehicles, the Bugatti Chiron. A car which has definitely grown on me, I would say, in the past year more than ever before, because the Veyron itself has grown on me a lot over time. I went through the same phases that most people do with the Veyron, initially finding it impressive, then kind of getting used to it, then thinking, it's a bit big, it's a bit heavy, it's not that great in most racing games. But then, as I've said before, the more cars I review in real life, the more I realise what kinds of car I tend to enjoy the most, and even though I've never driven a Veyron, I hope to of course eventually, I already know I'm going to love it, because it suits me down to a T in terms of real-world cars. In a game, though, that doesn't quite work out, because racing games deal in absolutes. It only matters if the car is the best. Everything else is by definition not as good. So if you compare something like a Veyron to, let's say, a McLaren F1, well, of course, within the world of a racing game, the comfort, the obnoxiously loud cabin noise of certain supercars like a McLaren, the fact that the McLaren is known for being twitchy, or just pick another supercar name as a comparison, well, those things don't matter in a game in the way that they do in real life. So the sheer performance is the be-all and end-all. So naturally, if you do find the Veyron to maybe not quite be quick enough around a track, or maybe a bit too heavy, or a bit too understeery maybe, then the Chiron might be the car for you, because this makes improvements to literally every single aspect of what the Veyron can already do well, and improve some things which it doesn't do so well. Now, it still has, of course, the trademark Bugatti combination of high weight, all-wheel drive, and fairly heavy steering with brakes that feel like they do a good enough job, but they're not necessarily up to the task when you're doing 250 miles an hour down the Mulsanne Straight. But when you tune it, that really can change. Now, even so, it's still a well over 1,500 kilo car, 2 tons to begin with, which is heavier than the Veyron, but it's putting out a hell of a lot more power than a Veyron. Nearly 1,500 horsepower stock. You can tune this thing within the game to 1,800 horsepower, so pretty much Bugatti Vision GT territory, except way less downforce than the Vision GT would have, which of course has pros and cons. The con is that it's not as quick around a track, not as good as a race car, quote unquote. The plus side, though, is absolutely ballistic straight line performance. This thing is already hitting speeds of 300 miles an hour. I mean, it doesn't really take much to get it to do that in the game with that kind of power, and I'm really happy with how good this feels in the game. Now, prior to this, I believe pretty much the only other game that I've used a Chiron in would have been the Forza titles, and in Forza it kind of just does feel like another Veyron. It's not particularly amazing, and even the Veyrons in those games aren't as quick as some of the other vehicles that just have an engine swap, so they feel a bit underwhelming. Ironically, in the way that you'd expect a Bugatti to feel good, straight line performance. So thankfully in GT7, this does feel every bit as ballistic in a straight line as it should. Now, I probably will be releasing a tune setup for the Chiron at some point, and it might be one of those setups that I've done before wherein it's not specifically for a point level or a specific circuit or a specific race, it's more so a control or a grip or a handling tune or build, if you want to call it that, to just bring the handling up to a better standard, and then you can tune the power and performance around that to whatever level you need. Because it really is the kind of car that needs that sort of treatment. If you improve the brakes, the weight and the suspension, well, you don't really need to do that much else. And the huge advantage of all-wheel drive is that, or technically four-wheel drive, is that you don't really need to even give it racing tyres, because you've got so much grip anyway that you're not going to make as much of a difference as, for example, if this were a Koenigsegg in comparison, you know, a rear-wheel drive hypercar that just struggles to put all of that torque down without breaking loose. Now, another advantage this has over the Veyron is actually availability. Now, the price is $1 million more, so $3 million is a lot. It's the most expensive car of this update. The advantage, though, is you don't need an invitation to buy it. which is a pretty huge advantage because for many players, especially at the start of the game when you don't have enough cash, even if you wanted a Veyron, you probably just wouldn't be able to buy it at that stage for 2 million. So being able to buy this one regardless of when you earn that 3 million, without needing to coincidentally get an invitation, is a nice advantage to have. Now the point level is actually quite reasonable, and the weight certainly helps with that. It's only just over 705 points, and I can confirm you can use this as a Le Mans cash cow. Now you do need to very heavily restrict it to get it under 700 points on Racing Hards, but the performance is very good. It's a little bit thirstier than the Veyron under those circumstances, which makes sense because you're running a fair amount more power, over 700 horses and about 1600 kilos if I recall correctly in that form, but you can still do 180 to 200 miles an hour even with leaned out fuel and get a couple of laps to a tank, which, you know, for an 8 litre 16 cylinder 4-wheel drive 200 mile an hour hypercar isn't too bad. These are essentially Bentleys that can do 250 miles an hour, and for that they're very good. Overall, I'm really happy with how the Chiron has been introduced into the game. From what I've heard, and I mentioned this in my review of the update itself a few days ago, I've heard that this is a more aggressive car in real life compared to a Veyron as well. The Veyron is a little bit more Bentley-esque, whereas the Chiron is a little bit more Lambo-esque. And I will actually say, if you are a fan of something like a Lamborghini Aventador within this game, then you probably will like driving the Chiron, because it has that kind of Lamborghini all-wheel drive savage kind of approach, but with some heaviness to its steering and great straight line performance, except obviously being a Chiron turns all of that performance up to 11. Ultimately, I think it's a fantastic addition. I'm really glad to see it in the game. Bugattis don't do it for everyone anyway, and I mean, for those people, I guess a Bugatti that might change your mind would be if they ever added an EB110, because that's a very different approach to a Bugatti, similar in many ways, but much more traditional supercar all-round. That's by the by though, and we'll have to see if that ever happens, and I'd love to hear down below how mixed people are. Are you a fan of the car? Do you like how it feels in the game? Or maybe are you not a fan? Or if you haven't even bought it yet, have I maybe encouraged you to consider doing so if you weren't going to? That is it for my thoughts on the Chiron though, and for those who haven't entered, as I said at the start of the video, 6 days remain in my PS5 raffle, so check that out down below in the description if it interests you. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.